I want to talk more about the idea of having pride in your race, because this is something that a lot of not just Black people, but people around the world feel. And the dynamics of this changes very much by country. If you go to Poland, say, I think you would find a lot of Polish people that have pride in being Polish. And you could say the same of almost any other country in Europe. And there was a time when people actually would refer to the different European countries as races, right? The French race, the English race, so on and so forth. And so what it meant to have race pride in that context was to have pride in your white ethnic group, what we would today call white, though there was no concept of whiteness really in general, or that was not really an important concept, at least. When you look at America today, obviously, white pride is something you can't express. It's something that is synonymous with racism. The person who says they're proud of being white is pretty much unselfconsciously signaling to the world that they're a racist, so that anyone who maybe does feel some kind of pride but doesn't feel like a racist will just know not to say such a thing. What you can say is, I'm proud to be an American. And the American identity is different from European identities in the sense that we've at least made a very strong effort to not have it be based on race, right? You can say I'm proud to be an American and be any color, be from any part of the world. You can be a hyphenated American. You can be a Jamaican American, a Polish American, whereas you can't really be a Jamaican Pole. Or that concept just is not as strong. And I guess the root of this question is, what is the moral status of having pride in a group versus having pride in oneself as an individual? Given that a lot of normal people all around the world have pride in their group, it's a pretty normal human trait to feel. At the same time, I often cringe at the effects of group pride, because ultimately it's simply by accident of birth that you were born somewhere rather than another. And so to take pride in it as if it's an accomplishment of yours has always seemed to me to be a crutch. And it's a crutch I can understand. It's a crutch I can even feel at certain points. But upon reflection, I do think it's the crutch of someone who finds it too difficult to build something as an individual. So how do you see the difference between having pride in one's group and having pride in oneself?
I agree with your take that you just explained at the end, that upon reflection, which is, I think, the key point there, is upon reflection, it doesn't make sense to have pride in the group, because you're taking pride, and also the flip side, feeling negatively for actions that you yourself didn't take. I, however, also think that this is just a part of the social nature of human beings. So I think if you take the time to really think about it, to reflect on it, and you try to have, I don't know how to say, a pure character when it comes to this stuff, I would go with your thinking. And I'm more think like that because I'm like thinking as an individual, but, and I promote that, I guess, but for the vast majority of people, they're just not like that. I do think that you can make a distinction between ethnic pride versus racial pride. Although I don't agree with either of them. I think the racial pride makes less sense than the ethnic pride, just because there's more of a sense, I think, of an actual shared identity with the ethnic pride. because the racial pride, it spans people who have, I think, very, very, very little in common. Like they're okay, there's biology, but I don't know. I don't think that means very much. And this is what you asked me, but I don't think I've even said this anytime on my channel, but this is something I've thought before that I find almost amusing. Is all these people going around calling themselves Black when, I mean, I guess people in Jamaica did that too, or do that, though not in the same way as in America. When they never did that before they were grouped together as being one identity through, I think, slavery as an institution. Like people just didn't conceive of themselves as being like one and the same with like another tribe, but like it's just adopted now and they fight you if you want to like not do that. I think that's ironic or something. Because I know that is not like Africa had slaves. Like they separated themselves and like they didn't have like some one racial identity that now exists due to, I think, the institution of slavery. So I just think that's very, very interesting. So I think I answered your question plus added a little bit.
This is something Thomas Chatterton Williams has talked about. I don't know if have you met him?
No, but I know who he is. Yeah.
So one thing he says in his book that I think is hilarious and true is that if you ask especially a well-read or, elite Black person in America, why it's the case that a person who is mixed race, who has a Black mother and white father, for instance, is considered Black or can identify as Black rather than mixed race or biracial or even white. Because from an objective point of view, those are equally arbitrary choices to make, right? The fact that Obama identifies as Black rather than white, from the universe's point of view, is totally an arbitrary decision. But in our culture, it's obvious to many people that he should identify as Black. A lot of times the answer you will get is, oh, well, there's this thing called the one drop rule, which is back in the days of slavery. If you had even one quote unquote drop of Black blood, if 1/16, if 1 out of 16 of your great grandparents were Black, you would be considered Black enough to be a slave. And Thomas Chatterton Williams says, okay, well, that's all well and good. I understand the history, but why the hell would we impose plantation logic on ourselves today when we have the choice, right? Because it's not obvious that because a certain norm was the case under slavery, that we must continue to perpetuate that norm today. Yeah, this just seems like an obvious connection to many people that we are stuck in the racial categorizations that were created by slavery. We can never outgrow them. And to think otherwise just marks you as ignorant of the history. It seems to me there's very little prospect of outgrowing race if this is what the next wave of, higher college students are being taught, essentially, is that America's attitude towards racial categories was fixed in, around the year 1700, and we're just doomed to inherit the rigidity of those racial categories for all time. And that's why when someone like you or Camille comes along and says, I'm not Black, a lot of Black people have an aneurysm. They cannot process it because it's in a way, I think people become wedded to these categories, even if the categories themselves, we all acknowledge, were born in sin, and they end up giving people meaning in life. And I think maybe there is a benign way of getting group pride, which is, for instance, sometimes I think about when the Olympics is happening and I just turn on a random, I don't know, like skiing or something. I don't know anybody who's doing it. I don't really care about it, but I feel like watching it because it's the Olympics and it's America versus some other country. I root for America. I just do. And I get a little bit happier if America wins because America is familiar to me. Of course, if America's going against, say, I don't know, like Sweden or whatever, I have no feelings of ill will towards Sweden. I don't want us to go invade Sweden. I don't want to see Sweden do poorly in the world. Not that they're at risk of doing poorly, but that seems like a kind of benign pride. It's like a pride that doesn't hurt anybody. I like New York sports teams more than Boston sports teams. I just grew up hating the Patriots. That's just what one does if you grow up in the New York area. Do I actually wish something bad would happen to Tom Brady? No. They say he's a great guy. He does a lot of charity work. I can step back from my provincial New Yorker perspective and understand that you know none of this stuff matters, but I can kind of role play pride in order to have fun watching sports, say. And if racial pride could become more like that, I think I would have no problem with it. If it felt like something you can step into in a benign way in order to have fun in certain situations. I know a lot of Black people will root for the Black person they're watching. And, you root for Tiger Woods because he's Black. That's sort of how I grew up as well. And that kind of stuff seems benign to me. But then there's this much more serious and pernicious style of race pride where it basically, having pride in your race is a substitute for thinking about specific issues. And the one that's always on my mind recently is policing, right? It's like, if you are a proud Black person, that means you must say all cops are bastards. You must think every instance of a policeman and a Black person getting into a confrontation, any one of these incidents that we've seen over the past year is racism, right? It's obviously racism. There's no more complexity to the issue. And so race pride becomes a substitute for thinking about complex ethical issues.